Have you ever been told this?
Diet has nothing to do with it.
I'm sure you have. I have. If you haven't, please let me know. Please let me know if you had a doctor that right away embraced a diet as a treatment or a management option for IBD, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. Welcome to episode 2 of Digestible Dialogues. I'm Sherry Lipp. I'm the founder of Happy Gut for Life and the host of this podcast. And today I have a topic I am looking forward to sharing with you, and that is talking about why the medical community hasn't embraced diet as an option, as a method, as just part of a treatment plan for treating Crohn's disease. So, in the opening, I think, that's something I heard as soon as I was diagnosed. So the funny thing is, before I was diagnosed, I heard that my doctor actually told me that I was causing my symptoms because I must be eating a poor diet. But then as soon as I was diagnosed, it's like, nope, diet doesn't have anything to do with that. So which is it? Now, I think the truth is somewhere in there. It's not our fault we have IBD or Crohn's disease. Little babies have it, small children. So as much as we might want to blame food, we don't really know the causes. There's all kinds of triggers and causes, and we don't really know. That's the kind of the what IBD and autoimmune illnesses are about, is we don't know what causes these flare-ups. But we know we get them, but trying to be like, oh, food doesn't have anything to do with it when it's going through our digestive system, that doesn't stand to reason at all, except I think I was told, oh, don't eat things that irritate you, but trying to figure out what those things are and what things actually might help, because of course the idea was that they might hurt you if you don't agree with them, but nothing's going to help you. So that is what we're going to talk about today. So let me get out of the way. This is not medical advice. It's a discussion mostly based on my own experiences and some of my research, but it's not medical advice. And I always encourage you to continue working with your medical team, with your doctor. Do not stop anything without doctor advice, or take your own path without discussing it with your doctor. So now that that's out of the way, so what I'm going to be talking about is kind of why the medical community hasn't embraced it, why that might be changing a little bit, and a comparison in this episode about specific carbohydrate diet and a diet called IBD-AID. So I'll be talking about, there's other diets that are kind of commonly used, or people have found, I'm not going to say nothing's common, but that people have found helps them. One of them is GAPS diet, and I will be talking about that, but I want to do it in a separate episode. I feel like GAPS is kind of even more closely related to SCD than even IBD-AID is, and so I wanted to dedicate the next episode to that. So I'll be kind of talking about the medical thing, and then we'll continue that discussion next podcast about the differences between SCD diet and GAPS diet. But for today, we're sticking with IBD-AID. So first of all, there's a lot of reasons that the medical community hasn't embraced diet in general. And that is, there's just not a lot of research based on it. Support for diet is pretty anecdotal, although there's continuing to be more and more studies, so that's exciting. There's a lot of research about how the microbiome reacts to different dietary things that we do, particularly when it comes to processed foods, additives, and sugar, high sugar diets. It's very difficult because different people have different reactions to things. And so, like I said, babies get diagnosed with IBD and they didn't do anything wrong. And I don't want to use the word wrong when it comes to eating, because we eat what's available to us, and that varies so widely, and that's a whole other topic when we talk about food availability, scarcity, culture. Like I've talked about before, I think there's room for all of these things that go on in our lives when it comes to some dietary management of these kinds of conditions. But when we're talking about the medical community, for one thing, doctors work in medicine. And a dietary approach, at least these days, right now, is not really medicine. It's you might see a nutritionist, so they might refer you to a nutritionist. I kind of like it when people say that their doctors referred them to a nutritionist, because at least you're working with somebody who has that as a background, because medical doctors don't really get a lot of nutrition education, because what they're concentrating on is a medical approach to our whatever we have. So a medical approach is usually our prescription type treatments, and I'm not going to get into pharmaceutical companies or anything like that. I'm just trying to stick to the basics. I don't want to get into these kinds of debates about why and money and all that stuff. But what I'm talking about is medical treatments usually have to do with some kind of physical treatment, a surgery, procedure of some kind, or a prescription. It's not that often that doctors will talk about some kind of alternative approach. If you want an alternative approach, you got to go to an alternative medicine doctor. I think there's a little bit of room for marriage in those things, and there are some doctors who are starting to embrace the idea that maybe we can. At least some of them are like, they don't think you can totally treat it, but they're open to the idea of management through diet. And so that's exciting to see, but it is so slow. So let's talk about some of the reasons why that is. So there's a variety of reasons. Some of it's just resistance. Some of it's like that we've always been doing it this way, so why would we look at it any other way? That's kind of the saddest reason, because progress is progress. And really, SCD diet has been around for a long time. Of course, it was developed way back in the 50s, even go back to the 20s, where Dr. Haas was, working on this with celiac patients, but then into the 50s with Elaine Gottschalk's daughters, and then she developed the diet throughout the 80s and into the 90s. So it's been around a long time. So there's a lot. It's not totally anecdotal. There's a lot of actual evidence that it works, but what happens is that there is a lack of like a dedicated study, a large scale one, and the problem is it's hard to do a large scale study when it comes to diet, because is everybody following it the same? You're going to lock everybody up into some kind of research facility so that you can make sure you know exactly what they're having, so they don't get anything else. And you prescribe, and then, there's a lot of variability within SCD itself. Some people tolerate some things and some people don't. So how do you make it rigid? And then what's the control group? What are they having? It's so varied. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons. The other reason is doctors get, even though they don't know, they're not studied in nutrition, but then they start talking about deficiencies and stuff like that. That's where I think it's a good idea, where if they refer you to a nutritionist, that's one step in the right direction, because they start talking about deficiencies, but are they fully versed in that? Or they kind of just, they've heard that and that's where they're going with it. Or maybe you have blood work that's showing a lot of deficiency. That could be the case too. And you have to be very careful if that's the case, because SCD can be difficult to get going when you have a lot of symptoms. And if you have a lot of deficiency, you're not feeling well, of course the doctor's like, we want to get you feeling better as quickly as we can, and the dietary approach can be very slow. So there is that, and those are like the main reasons. It's resistance, it's lack of great studies on it, it's the difficulty of doing studies, and then it's the worry about, are we getting to your condition fast enough? The other thing is ensuring that people are sticking with it. Because even, when we're dieting, we can easily, not only might we withhold information from our doctor about, like, we ate that candy bar or whatever, we might be withholding it from ourselves. Have you ever tracked like what you're eating and not put the one thing on there because you're like, I don't even want to admit to myself that I had it, as if your app or your book or your journal is going to judge you on it. So there, that's kind of human nature. So there is that element. So those are the main reasons why it is so difficult to get that dietary approach in there. Although I think kind of one of the biggest ones that's the roadblock is the resistance. I think that we could start to overcome some of those other problems if there wasn't so much resistance. That's just my opinion on it. But the good news is that there is starting to be little changes and more studies. There's quite a few. There's actually a lot of studies on diet and IBD, but they kind of stay in the research area, unfortunately, and they don't get out to implementation, in my opinion. They're just kind of, a lot of people are researching it. It's not going in a lot of places. And there's research on SCD diet and just kind of, like I said, like the microbiome in general. And that's great. I like seeing that there's a lot of research on the microbiome because there's so much we didn't know about it when SCD first started. So IBD-AID. Why am I talking about IBD-AID? So IBD-AID is something that was developed from the roots of SCD diet. Now, some people with SCD don't really like that idea because a lot of people refer to it as an updated version of SCD. And that's how they talk about it. So it was developed out of UMass, University of Massachusetts, and they took some modern research and plugged that into the principles of SCD, and they developed this diet. I am kind of all for it. I love SCD as my foundation. That's what I talk about. That's what I had success with. Not everybody does. So that's why I'm all for more research, because in my opinion, I don't think that SCD can be the one because it is not continuing to be updated. It's stuck where it is. So that's why for me, I like when there's more research, and I'm not, my goal is for people to get healthy in whatever method that's going to be. So I like a CD diet and it worked for me. I'm not going to say that this other one's bad or doesn't work, or they shouldn't have done it because SCD was already there, because there are people continually working on it. If you go to their website, they have lists and they have all the new things they're doing and they have phases. So there is a little bit of a more embrace in the medical community of IBD-AID. And the reasons for that are that it's getting some updated research. There are doctors currently working on it, and they have an implementation plan that doctors find appealing, because the thing with SCD is there's not really a lot of solidified guidance. And so you have to trial and error a lot of it yourself to figure out what works. Whereas IBD-AID has some phases, and they have, foods, and they have like who should be using what phase and like what kind of foods go in each phase. And not only that, but how you should prepare those foods. So if you're in phase 1, you need to be cooking all your vegetables well and fruits, and maybe you're limiting fruits, whereas SCD also encourages you to cook your vegetables well when you're first starting. But it kind of says all foods are available, and you have to figure out like what you should have. IBD-AID also includes some foods not allowed on SCD. So some doctors find it more appealing in the fact that it's a little broader, maybe a little easier for people to embrace and stick to, because it doesn't exclude as much. It doesn't exclude as much. So it does have, so there's another thing. It emphasizes prebiotics and probiotics. Whereas prebiotics was not real. Prebiotics is more of it's a newer discovery as far as how it works in with our microbiome, and so that wasn't, my prebiotics weren't as much a part of SCD when Elaine was doing her research, and that is not her fault at all. I mean, research continues, and unfortunately she couldn't do it forever, so I'm sure she would have been if she could have. And maybe things would have changed, maybe there'd be a new breaking the vicious cycle. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I'm just saying research continues, and there are things about the microbiome that we know now that she just wasn't able to know. That's not her fault. But prebiotics are soluble fibers, and they help with the fermentation of bacteria in the intestine, and they work together with probiotics, so you get it helps make regular healthy microbiome. It reduces inflammation, and so that's an emphasis of IBD-AID. And basically, it's getting that inflammation reduced. And in the agreement with SCD is that there is a bacterial imbalance that's causing all this inflammation, or at least it's exacerbating it. Maybe the autoimmune reaction is that this inflammation happened. We don't know why, but diet has made it, is diet helping it get under control? We don't know exactly why it's out of balance, but can diet help it get back in balance? And that's the standpoint that they're coming from. That's kind of the standpoint that I live my life by. And so that's where they're coming from on that. And like I said, there's phases. And so there's certain things they have in their diet that are prebiotic, like steel cut oats and flaxseed and kefir. And my thing, they do have yogurt on there, Greek yogurt on there, but I mean, I kind of prefer the homemade yogurt where you're doing it yourself and you get all the lactose out, because they are saying to have low lactose, just like hard cheeses like we do on SCD diet. So I think making your own yogurt is probably still the most beneficial thing, even though they don't have that. And they also include bifidus. So, and I'm talking about this also with the GAPS diet. SCD is the only diet of these ones who exclude bifidus for every person following it. And I'll be talking about that too. In the episode after the GAPS one, I'll be talking a little bit more about bifidus. But it's included as a probiotic in that diet. So I think that doctors kind of look at that as a kind of a current thing, where SCD might be considered old. I don't know exactly. I've gotten to talk to a few different doctors about it, and that's kind of what I've heard a little bit of. And so that's why IBD-AID might start to make some headway. And for me, anything like that makes headway into treatment for IBD is a win. I'm not going to say it has to be a CD diet, because we need diet, because the principles, like what if I'm going to say, if somebody's like, I can't do all this, what I'm going to tell them to do is avoid processed foods, concentrate on whole foods, avoid refined sugars and refined grains, and additives and ultra processed foods. That's what I'm going to tell them to start with if they're like, I'm overwhelmed by these diets. Okay, well, let's make it simple, because these diets all have that as their principle, as their foundations. So that is where I'm at with those. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. Have you experienced where doctors have told you about diet? Have they suggested a CD diet or any of these GAPS or IBD-AID or AIP or even paleo? And also, there's Mediterranean diet. There's been some research on that. I find it kind of weird to say it's Mediterranean diet. I actually don't think it's Mediterranean diet. I think it's just what I just said. Mediterranean diet emphasizes whole foods and healthy fats, but it's problematic in the fact that it's like there are lots of diets around the world that emphasize those things. It doesn't have to be Mediterranean. So I wish that study, there is a study that did Mediterranean diet and SCD diet for a control group, and there was some success, and that is great. But I don't think it needs to be Mediterranean diet. I think it could be some kind of whole foods, healthy foods diet. instead of like narrowing it to such a small section of society when around the world there are low cases of IBD, and like we should be looking more at that and not just at like something that's popular like Mediterranean diet or paleo diet. It's all the same principles. We're talking about whole foods, less processed foods, or no processed food, limited processing. All foods are processed to a certain extent. I'm talking about ultra processed foods with a lot of additives that have like left their natural state far behind. That's what I'm talking about. So tell me your experiences and tell me your thoughts. Have you tried IBD-AID? Have you looked into it? What do you do if you have IBD? And like I said, this is not medical advice, and medication and diet are an option for a lot of people. I happen to be somebody who was able to get medication free, but I am not against people taking the medication. A lot of people find success with both things because sometimes medication stops being as effective. Sometimes diet stops being as effective, and that's why we have to continue to keep looking at it. So that is where we're at with that. And let's, we're going to advocate for more consideration amongst the medical community that this needs to be a part of our treatment. And for some people, it can be their whole treatment. It just depends. Everybody's different. So tell me your thoughts on this. And we will see you next time. We'll be talking about GAPS diet compared to SCD diet, because SCD diet is the kind of the king here. It's the foundation for this, and that's where we want to expand our knowledge on that. So thank you all for listening. If you like this, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe. And I will see you on the next one.